comenzamos este ciclo de charlas con una serie de personalidades invitados de la música antigua. Hoy tenemos la suerte de contar con nosotros, con Phillip Picket. Nos gustaría que interviniesen ustedes y aprovecharan precisamente la oportunidad de contar con un especialista en repertorio antiguo, director y con un currículum y una trayectoria de lo más interesante, que aprovecharan para hacerle preguntas y para plantearle lo que les parezca. Les presento brevemente. Nuestro invitado nace en Londres en 1950. Comienza estudiando trompeta y por un accidente que luego nos contará, se dedica, estudiaba flauta también y cambia o abandona la trompeta para estudiar definitivamente, centrarse en la flauta. Desde 1972 trabaja como profesor de este instrumento, tarea que ejerce durante 25 años. Y es flautista solista de numerosas agrupaciones inglesas muy prestigiosas dentro del ámbito de la interpretación historicista, como son Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, The English Concert, The English Chamber Orchestra, London Mozart Players y otros. Al tiempo que su faceta como director, intérprete en el ámbito de la música antigua, Mr. Picket desarrolla una labor con grupos de, música moderna. Concretamente, en 1976 entra a formar parte de la banda, el grupo The Albion Band, un grupo de folk rock que mezcla elementos procedentes de la música tradicional y medieval e instrumentos de tradiciones muy diferentes. En el 88 publica su primer disco en solitario, The Alchemist, que contiene composiciones suyas en estilo medieval. Y 10 años después, en el 98, publica un segundo álbum, The Bones of All Men, que es un disco con melodías de música antigua fusionados con elementos procedentes del rock e instrumentos del rock. Igualmente ejerce también una labor de gestor musical y en 1993 es nombrado director del Festival de Música Antigua de Shakespeare Globe Theatre y en el 95 es nombrado director del Shakespeare Globe Theatre, de este teatro que es una reconstrucción de la compañía de Shakespeare de 1599. Del 94 al 97 es fundador y director del Festival de Música Antigua de Aldeburgh y del 96 al 2003 es director artístico del Festival de Música Antigua del South Bank Center. Dirige desde mediados de los 90 dos grupos de New London Consort especializados en música antigua, concretamente en repertorio medieval, renacentista y barroco, y The Musicians of the Globe, dedicado a repertorio inglés de los siglos XVI y XVII. Y en los últimos tiempos, como director, ha emprendido una carrera de director solista, de director invitado de diferentes orquestas, entre las que se encuentra la Filarmónica de Hong Kong, de Rotterdam, de Navarra, con las que interpreta ya no solo repertorios barrocos, sino también clásicos y románticos. Amplía su campo de géneros o de ámbitos de interpretación. Muy buenas tardes, Mr. Picket, y muchas gracias por su asistencia.
Good evening. What a lot of ancient history.
Me gustaría comenzar planteándole una pregunta, ya que de su currículo, lo más llamativo, considero que es su doble faceta de músico en el ámbito de la interpretación historicista de la música clásica y, por otro lado, su participación en grupos, de rock o grupos modernos. Teniendo en cuenta que usted es considerado uno de los miembros más destacados de la interpretación, historicista, que trata de recuperar el sonido y las formas de interpretación originales, es llamativo que al mismo tiempo no tenga ningún reparo en tocar la flauta, su instrumento, con grupos de rock y en transgredir, los rectos senderos de la música culta. ¿Cómo se explican estas dos vertientes?
I have a very broad mind. Can you understand me? I have a very broad mind. And in fact, if you really think about it, there isn't such a big difference between folk rock music and medieval or Renaissance music. And in fact, I feel a great empathy for all kinds of music. And I had no problem at all in fitting in with an electric folk rock band. It was great fun. And in fact, I'm still regarded as a bad boy doing this kind of project. And just before Christmas, I was involved with Richard Thompson, who is one of the world's leading guitar players and folk rock singers. He lives in Los Angeles, and he came and we made a little tour and a concert in London with the musicians of the Globe and with Richard. But we were not playing electric instruments. We were playing Elizabethan instruments, and he was singing Elizabethan music. So we've turned it around the other way.
Para entrar un poco en detalles, me gustaría que nos contara un poco cómo fueron sus experiencias con The Albion Band, un grupo, he podido ver en internet algún vídeo de un macrofestival, desde luego resultaba llamativo y muy interesante, y me gustaría que nos contara pues, cómo fueron aquellas experiencias.
It was a very long time ago. I've nearly forgotten. But well, they were fun, and one thing that I really did enjoy about it was the improvisational nature of the performing. That we were not reading from music, and in fact we were making our own rather wonderful arrangements of very minimal material, which stood me in very good stead for the rest of my career, in fact, because when dealing with medieval music, for example, say the Cantigas de Santa Maria or the Libre Familia, which we have been very involved with my own group over many years, to actually make that music live, one takes a little strand of material and expands it into a kind of Mahler symphony. And if you have no experience of how to do that, then it can prove very, very unsatisfactory. And playing in that rock band really gave me a lot of ideas of how to expand material. Of course, I took a lot of interest in the way that Arab musicians and Indian musicians take their fragments of material and build whole evenings of music out of them. But actually having the personal experience of the rock band was very, very useful for me.
¿Y qué le llevó, por ejemplo, como he comentado antes, en la fecha, en el 88, publica su primer disco en solitario, en el que compone sus propios temas en estilo medieval? ¿Cómo surgió esa idea?
Are you talking about
The Alchemist.
The Alchemist? No, I didn't compose anything.
Oh, sorry.
A friend of mine called John Dupre, who was a film composer, wrote a few of the pieces that we recorded. Actually, I took a lot of old music and arranged it in a rather naughty way, using all kinds of electronic devices and machinery and studio techniques. In fact, there are a lot of musicians playing on that album, and none of them actually met. Every single one of them recorded his own contribution with no one else there, what we call multi-tracking. And I did a lot of multi-tracking. I'm sure you've all heard of Paul McCartney, of the Beatles. My greatest claim to fame, I think, is that I am the title track of his album Pipes of Peace, because I think there are 24 of me, one overlaid on top of the next, playing all kinds of crumb horns and shawms and early wind instruments on that album. So I did a lot of that on Alchemist, but I couldn't play everything, so I had to bring trumpet players and cello players and keyboard players in to help. But as I said, none of us met.
Bueno, pido disculpas por esta confusión. Ha sido la información que he encontrado en internet. Espero no equivocarme con su segundo disco, con The Bones of All Men, sobre el que le quería preguntar.
Never believe anything on the internet. It's even got my date of birth wrong.
Sí, le decía que en su segundo disco, The Bones of All Men, si no me equivoco.
Well, yeah, it's the bones of all men, not old.
Yeah.
The bones of all men. In other words, it is what is elemental in all.
Es un problema de mi pronunciación, perdón, pero tengo escrito.
No problem.
Tengo escrito O. Intentaré mejorar la pronunciación de la palabra. Le decía que ahí sí que mezcla elementos procedentes de la tradición culta, melodías medievales, y utiliza instrumentos modernos, como guitarras eléctricas, bajos eléctricos.
Well, remember I mentioned Richard Thompson, and in fact
Sí.
that album is a collaboration between Richard and myself, and we got together with a number of people, a few people from my world playing the medieval fiddle, and a lot of early keyboard, like the harpsichord, the clavichord, and other rather stranger, more esoteric keyboard instruments from the Renaissance period. And we put together an album with the rhythm section of another folk rock group called Fairport Convention, which was one of the most famous of the English folk rock groups. And in fact, Richard Thompson had been a founder member of that group before he left to become a soloist. And that album actually is based on Renaissance keyboard music, which we've arranged for drum kits and electric guitars, and then me, again, multi-tracking on any number of early wind and early keyboards and a medieval fiddle.
¿Y qué le reportaron todas aquellas experiencias en el ámbito de la música culta, digamos, por llamarlo de alguna manera?
Well, they were jolly good fun, you know. I enjoyed every minute of it. But then I enjoy every minute of every music that I do. It's just that I cannot limit myself. I cannot have a narrow mind. I mean, even when I approach old music, I have a much broader interest in things which are important to the performance of it than many other performers I know.
¿Sigue interesándose hoy en día por el rock y otras formas de música apartadas de la música clásica?
Yeah, definitely. I want to do a project with Carlos Núñez. And we're talking to him and his manager in about 3 weeks' time.
¿Nos quiere contar algo sobre el proyecto o todavía no se puede?
No? Well, I can tell you that Carlos and I have known each other for many, many, many years. That when he was a very, very young boy, he came to a concert that I did in Vigo, and he and his friends came to see me and my colleagues after the concert, and they took us out for a drink. He wasn't old enough to drink at that point. They took us out for a drink, and then they took us to see a workshop where they were making their own instruments, and it was completely wonderful that they were making hurdy-gurdies, you know.
Zanfona.
Yeah, and gaiters and flautas and all kinds of other things, and playing them. And actually, almost exactly a year ago, Carlos came to see me in England, and we talked about the possibilities of what we might do together, because he, like me, is very interested in what develops when people from different areas of music get together. I mean, he's just been in Brazil for a long time and come back with a wonderful album and a great deal of interesting material linking Brazilian music with Galician music. Now, there are many, many areas of Galician music and traditional Galician music, which have very distinct echoes of things from the Middle Ages. And so it seems a very good idea for the two of us to get together and see where we might go. So we're only talking at the moment. It would be a lot of fun.
De todas formas, ¿no cree usted que es muy inglés esta mezcla, estos crossover? Y quizás una mentalidad un poco desprejuiciada que por lo menos yo creo que aquí no, en nuestro país no se da tanto a la hora de no tener reparos en usar una orquesta para grabar un disco de camarón.
Well, people don't like what I do in England. For example, I've just been involved. Well, I'm much more than involved. I am the creator of a new opera written by Henry Purcell. It was originally called The Fairy Queen, and it wasn't an opera at all. It was incidental music for a play, Midsummer Night's Dream, by Shakespeare. And taken on its own, the music makes absolutely no story and no sense at all. So what I did, I looked at it. I have a lot of experience of working with music by Purcell and how it should be and how it could be performed and how one can take music from these plays and put them in such a way that they work in a modern concert hall. And using all that experience, I put together the music from the Shakespeare play, Fairy Queen. I put it in a new order. And the new order makes a story. It makes sense. And a lot of people love it. We're presenting it as a semi-staged opera. In fact, we're performing it in Barcelona on the 28th of this month. And you can watch it on the net because we performed it in the Cité de la Musique in Paris and they videoed it. So if you go to the Cité de la Musique website and look for their TV channel, you can actually watch our performance of The Fairy Queen, which has got nothing to do with Shakespeare and Midsummer Night's Dream at all anymore. Now, a lot of people love it, but one or two people are really, really angry that I did it. But as I was saying to Miguel earlier while we were talking about what we would talk about here this evening, when you get to my age, you don't care anymore because you have enough experience and enough confidence in what you do, and you can believe in what you do to just get on with it and do it and not worry about what people think.
Como les dije antes, si quieren intervenir, están invitados en cualquier momento. Cambiando un poco de tema, tal vez la expresión "el azar es orden en el tiempo", enunciada por el pintor Guillermo Pérez Villalta, podría aplicarse a su historia con la trompeta. ¿Nos podría contar cómo fue aquella anécdota que le llevó a abandonar este instrumento y a dedicarse por completo a la flauta?
Well, very simple. I was kicked one night and one of my teeth cut a nerve in my upper lip and I couldn't feel anything for about 30 years. And if you can't feel anything, you can't play the trumpet anymore. So I'm afraid I had to give it up.
Algo que se me ha olvidado preguntarle antes es que con The Alchemist usted decidió incorporar juegos malabares y acrobacias con fuego a sus conciertos. ¿Qué le motivó o también estoy equivocado?
Well, not with The Alchemist. The Alchemist was an album, finish. We never performed it live in any way at all. But what I did with my New London Consort in its medieval form, one day we were invited to make a very large scale concert in a big concert hall. And at that time, certainly in England and probably in the world, medieval music was a very small scale activity. groups of 3, 4, 5 people performing in concert halls, maybe 2 or 3 times bigger than this little lecture theatre, but not in a big 1,000-seater or 1,500-seater or even 2,000-seater concert hall. So we were invited to give a program of medieval music in a large concert hall, and I had to think of some kind of theme which would enable me to expand my 6-man small medieval group into something big enough to make enough noise to fill that hall. And what I came to was to put together an idea of the Lent gathering of minstrels. During Lent, the minstrels were not allowed to perform and entertain. So they all got together, thousands of them, literally, and they swapped tricks and stories and learnt new songs. So we gathered together a large number of people who were interested in and were regularly performing medieval music, and we gathered some material that the Lenten gathering of minstrels would have known. And so we called it a medieval extravaganza, and because these minstrels didn't only play and sing, they did acrobatics, they juggled, they did magic, they did acting, they storytelling. We got together a number of buffones, what would you call it, yeah, and we made the first of my medieval shows, if you like, mixing all kinds of interesting media together. So it wasn't just medieval music, it was the whole of medieval entertainment all at once. And it was very, very successful. So that is the story behind that one.
Quería que nos contara eso, porque de nuevo responde a una personalidad muy plural y, como usted ha dicho de sí mismo, muy abierta. Y dado que que he mencionado antes un pintor, me gustaría si en algún momento, dentro de sus proyectos muy abiertos, habría algún hueco para las artes plásticas.
Well, funnily enough, we are about to begin a project to perform King Arthur of Purcell, another of these plays with a lot of music. Now, you cannot take the music of King Arthur and reorder it. What you have to do is to present the story. So my idea is to have the magician Merlin telling the story. And then we hear the music, and my idea for making the performance work in concert halls is to have a very large screen behind the performers onto which we will project images relevant to the play. So we will see the battles and the magic and the trees walking behind us. So that is one area where, yes, I'm very interested in combining music and plastic arts.
Muy interesante. Tal vez puede plantearse también dar vida a los cuadros, como hace poco pudimos ver recientemente en una ópera en el Teatro Real, en que precisamente un cuadro de El Bosco, los personajes se movían y cobraban vida.
What was the opera?
La página en blanco, un estreno mundial de Pilar Jurado.
Yeah. I've seen photographs. And Bosch is my favorite painter.
Volviendo un poco a su carrera, decíamos que había tenido que dejar la trompeta por este pequeño accidente y usted se dedica por completo y por entero a la flauta y se convierte en uno de los flautistas más solicitados. ¿Cómo da el paso de ser un intérprete virtuoso que actúa con alguna de las agrupaciones británicas, decíamos, más importantes, a ser el director de 2 grupos especializados?
Well, I played the recorder, the flauta dulce, for fun from the age of 19. I began very late at school to play, just because I liked Baroque music and I liked playing Baroque music on the trumpet. But of course I could play an awful lot more Baroque music if I played another instrument. And the advantage of the recorder, the flauta dulce, is that it doesn't require any embouchure. So it was not in any way going to interfere with the trumpet playing. And I was very lucky to play a wind instrument that didn't require any kind of lip control, because once I'd lost the nerve in my upper lip, I couldn't have controlled anything. So luckily I played an instrument that didn't require any control, which is why I became a recorder player. And I was certainly not a virtuoso at the beginning. I just played it for fun. And I had to work very, very hard, technically, to discover a way of playing it. Because when you begin doing something at the age of 19, you are very, very far behind, certainly in terms of the technical requirement. So I was very dedicated and I worked very hard, and I became adequate.
Sí, no me refería a que comenzara usted siendo virtuoso de la flauta. Imagino que recorrió un camino muy duro como todos los instrumentistas, pero le preguntaba sobre todo cómo dio el paso a la dirección y a convertirse, digamos, en el líder de dos grupos especializados en repertorio antiguo. Specialized.
Well, again, I think I was really born not to work for other people. That I really had to end up being in charge one way or another, and I have this kind of imagination and drive which makes me do things that other people don't necessarily do. So it all began at music college, and I had some very good friends who played the trombone. And I persuaded them immediately to take up the sackbut, which is the Renaissance version. Saccabucce. And, I just went on from there. And I was responsible for putting together the programs and the music and putting the musicians together and then directing them. And gradually we began to play and sing larger and larger repertoire until there came a point when there had to be a conductor, and it was me. That's how it happened.
Antes nos ha hablado un poco de Musicians of the Globe, espero no pronunciarlo demasiado mal. Me gustaría que nos hablara un poco un poco más, con mayor detalle, de cada uno de estos grupos, qué repertorio interpretan y qué instrumentos utilizan.
Okay, the Globe in England was built by Sam Wanamaker, an American actor, who came to England looking for Shakespeare's Globe, and he didn't find it. And he was very, very upset and decided that he would build one. And it took him more than 20 years. And towards the end, when the theatre was almost finished, he was looking around for people to populate the theatre, for directors and actors and musicians. And he came to me and he said, I understand from the research I've been doing on the street that you have a lot of experience with Renaissance music of Shakespeare's period from the authentic point of view, and that you also have worked in film and theatre and television very frequently. Therefore, maybe you would be the man to come and work with me at the Globe Theatre and bring your group. And I said, well, Sam, I'm delighted and I would love to become involved with your project. And I've been watching it for some years and thinking, I wonder who's going to be director of music. I wish it would be me. It would be very exciting to be there. But unfortunately, the people who work for me are not the kind of musicians who would like to come and work in a theatre. So I think we should compromise, and what I can suggest is that we gather together a number of younger musicians who are very, very good, but who do not play in all the Baroque orchestras and classical orchestras, but just play the Renaissance lute, the Renaissance viol, and the bandora, the cittern, Renaissance violin. These are the instruments that we play, and they are all very, very good copies of Renaissance instruments which were used by musicians who played in the Globe Theatre. And that is how the group began. And actually we didn't stay very long in the theatre because Sam Wanamaker died. It was very unfortunate. He never saw his theatre finished. And we were there for a couple of years, and then the director of the theatre, who was someone quite new, who was married, unfortunately, to a theatre music composer, they got rather jealous of the fact that we were there, and she wanted to be the director of music of the theatre. In fact, I remember one occasion when he tried to have her elected as the co-director of the theatre. So I'm really dishing the dirt here and telling stories. But there was no way that this ensemble and I could continue under that kind of antagonism. So we continued with the group, and we continue to this day to work. As I was telling you, we were doing this project before Christmas, and we still do what Sam Wanamaker wanted, which is to explore the music of Shakespeare's time in a vivid, vital and authentic manner at a very, very high level, but also to carry the name and the ethos that he wanted for that theatre around the world. And we still do that.
Si no me equivoco, comenzó usted desempeñando esta tarea desde mediados de los 90. ¿Ha cambiado su forma de interpretar esta música? ¿O en qué ha cambiado con el tiempo?
I think with more experience and more time and with players who've been together for a long time, we've become more and more free and more expressive. And we do things with the music which really enhances the meaning, what we call the affect, of every moment of the music. Much more now than we did at the beginning. That's the kind of freedom that comes with experience and being together for a long time. And also learning more and more about the repertoire. You must never stop learning and never stop experimenting and trying new things. That's what we're doing.
¿Cómo se llega a ser capaz de tocar en el ethos de una música concreta?
We're going to get very, very, very deeply complicated if we start to worry about that. When you're dealing with old music, the first thing to understand is that what you see on the page, and I'm talking about music that survives in written form, what you see on the page doesn't tell you anything much, because there are no expression marks. There's no metronome mark to tell you the tempo. There are no dots and dashes to tell you how long to play the notes. There's nothing to tell you, here we make a rallentando, we go slower. Here we go faster, we make an accelerando. All the things which one would find in a later music score are missing. But in fact, for somebody like me and my colleagues who've been working in this field for a long time, there are a million other things which inform us as to what we do with what is on the page. So we can find the spirit of the music through our other knowledge. And I talked to you earlier about rhetoric, literature, and art, as in visual art. Because without a knowledge of rhetoric, and without a knowledge of symbolism, and all the other various conventions which apply to earlier music, we cannot find the spirit of old music. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that the conventions and symbols of other art forms which everybody recognizes. You go to the Prado and you read the paintings. You open your books and you read the literature. I look at the music and I read the very same symbols and rhetorical aspects in the music that you all find and recognize in other art forms, and you accept that they are there. In music, it is much, much more difficult for people to even admit that these things are there. And I'll give you one very, very simple example. If you see a trumpet in a vanitas painting, it will represent either royalty or war or fame, la fama. If you hear a trumpet in music, it will represent either royalty or war or fame.
¿Qué decir ahora? Le quiero hacer la misma pregunta que le hacía antes como intérprete, ahora desde el punto de vista de director. ¿En qué ha cambiado su manera de dirigir desde que comenzó a realizar esta tarea?
Do you mean how have I changed? Maybe I got better at it, I don't know. I've had a lot of experience now. About 8 or 9 years ago, I'm not sure how long ago, I was lucky enough to be invited to conduct a couple of modern orchestras. That was something that I decided long ago I was never going to do. Because, well, any number of reasons. I didn't feel that it was right for me to either do it, and neither did I feel that it was right for me to leave my musicians and go out with other people. I felt it was kind of too timing, you know, being a bit, you know, leaving them behind and not being faithful to them. But having had the experience, and I enjoyed it enormously with 2 French orchestras, I must say, who are not always the easiest orchestras to work with, but I was very, very happy and very lucky to work with these particular musicians who gave me a very good response and a very musical response and a very, very good atmosphere. And from then on, I have been quite regularly appearing with modern orchestras, not always performing old music. I enjoy performing old music with some orchestras. For example, with your orchestra in Granada, which is a very, very good orchestra with a lot of experience in playing Bach, for example. And I have a very, very, very good experience with them. We've made several concerts together, which have been absolutely terrific. I also have been returning to my roots, my trumpet playing days, and looking at repertoire by people like Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and occasionally even later people like Brahms. And again, this is a way of me expressing something which is deep rooted within me, and sometimes the results are absolutely magical and everybody has a great time. Sometimes we come up against musicians who are not broad-minded at all and who are not interested in the fact that when Brahms, for example, wrote a very long slur, a ligature, over a lot of notes, he intended it to be performed in one bow, and this is very, very, very difficult, and modern players don't like to have to do anything which is very, very difficult, so there might be some antagonism. So again, some people love it, some people don't. I always love it.
Parece sin duda que su personalidad deja huella allá por donde va. Como director se ha centrado en, bueno, como director y como intérpretes, ha recorrido un largo camino pasando por música medieval, música del Renacimiento, música clásica, ahora nos hablaba incluso de música romántica. Únicamente se echa en falta quizá repertorio más contemporáneo del último siglo XX o siglo XXI. Lo encontraremos también dentro de poco a lo mejor en ese ámbito.
Well, I conducted a piece by John Taverner a month ago. So I am still somewhat involved. When I was younger, of course, when I played the trumpet, I played a lot of contemporary music, although we're talking very much about 20th century music there, not 21st century. But in the first years of my playing the recorder, I also played a lot of contemporary music. And after a time, I gave it up. And I'm sure you all want to know why I gave it up. I gave it up because I was playing with some very fine performers who were happy with approximations of what composers had written. And I was not happy. I had to work very, very, very hard on an instrument which I had not been playing since I was 4 years old, to play things which were never intended for an instrument of that nature, the recorder, in other words. I had to work incredibly hard to make sure that I was actually doing justice to what the composer had written. And all around me, I was working with people who were happy with an approximation of what he had written. And I became disenchanted and I gave it up. I would say that maybe that is one of the reasons that I enjoy so much playing film music and some kind of high quality rock music or folk rock music, because that gives me a way of expressing myself in a contemporary idiom.
Volviendo un poco al repertorio de la música antigua, en los 60 vinieron las propuestas pioneras de interpretación historicista. Más recientemente nos encontramos con orquestas modernas que interpretan repertorio antiguo o incluso clásico, con lo que llaman la interpretación históricamente informada, historically informed performance practice. ¿Cuál cree que será el camino o hacia dónde se dirige el acercamiento con criterios historicistas, digamos, en la música antigua?
Well, we already are in the future of the historical performance, because now we are in a situation where the young people are copying the old people and not discovering things for themselves. And what was exciting about the early days of the historically informed performance movement was the fact that none of us quite knew what we were doing. We were having to discover it again. And that means not only how to play these instruments, which were quite different from modern ones, but we also had to discover the spirit and soul of the music. We had to know who had performed it originally, where they'd performed it, what its function was, how many people performed it, what pitch it was performed at. All these many, many things we had to discover. And what seems to have happened is that we now have a number of national schools of early music performance where there is a kind of accepted way of playing that repertoire or that repertoire or that repertoire. And for me, the sad thing is actually with the young players who have emerged, and they have wonderful techniques now. They really can play very, very well. And what they tend to do, they tend to copy rather than searching for themselves. And I will give you an example of why I feel sometimes a little disappointed about that. That someone I have very high regard for as a performer studied with Arnoncourt, well, I say studied with Nicholas Arnoncourt, went to some classes that Arnoncourt gave. And I mentioned rhetoric earlier, and I said to her, how interesting, you know, he is one of my idols and my mentor, and what did he tell you about rhetoric and rhetorical performance? And she said, well, actually, he did mention it, and he gave us a book list, and none of us ever read the books. So we never pursued that aspect, which would have been so enlightening. So her performance style is actually very rhetorical. But she got it from a CD or 10, or from playing with people who had done that original research. And I wish that more young people would actually do that kind of, take that kind of attitude and do it for themselves. Because what I am feeling is that there are many, many young people giving wonderful performances, but none of them are individual enough. I want individuality, and that is where we should be going. Because now we have made this music ours. You know, I have no feeling. I'll give you another example of the way people think. More than 10 years ago, we were in New Zealand performing a lot of Bach because it was the anniversary, year 2000. And we were playing the B minor Mass, and there was a big press conference. And one chap put his hand up and said, Maestro, how long did it take you to prepare your interpretation of Bach's great masterpiece, the B minor Mass? And I looked him in the eye and I said, 10 minutes. And of course, shock horror, nobody could believe that I had opened the score of Bach's B minor Mass and I knew what to do with it. But I have to say that I did open the score of Bach's B minor Mass, and I knew what to do with it because at that point I had been studying what might be done with it for 30 years. And I think that is the important thing. 10 minutes is a joke. But if you have worked on something for 30 years, you do have a very clear foundation within yourself as to what you might do with it. You open it, you look at the crucifixes, you see the bass line, you see what it represents, you see the violins, you see the flutes and what they're doing. They're representing the blood and the water of the crucifixion. The bass line is showing symbolizing the agony, the pain, the throbbing pain of Christ. It is in the format of 3/2 time a lament, ground bass, like Purcell's Lament of Dido. There are all these things which you see on the page, and instantly you are informed about how it might be. You look at the mood word. You see how long the phrases are, and you know that that kind of material could have been sung by 1/2 apart, so you cannot stagger the breathing. The tempo has to be such that a singer can sing that line in one breath. You also know the pitch. It's a low pitch. It looks high, but actually it's performed low. There are so many things which after 30 years, if you do not know, you shouldn't be in that job. Which is why you can open the score and instantly you can read it as you would go to the Prado and read a painting.
De todas formas, ¿no le parece que esa falta de individualidad a la que usted hacía referencia en el mundo de la interpretación historicista es extrapolable a la música clásica en general, en un mundo como el nuestro globalizado y en donde a un clip de botón podemos escuchar cualquier grabación? Hay muchísimos intérpretes tremendamente virtuosos por todas partes, pero no es muy difícil encontrar a uno que sea muy diferente de otro o que tenga unos rasgos de personalidad que realmente sean llamativos, por lo general.
Yes, and if I have to perform a work that I've no knowledge of or never heard, what do? I will look at Carlos Kleiber. I will go to some recording from 1930. That is, I want to find something which is individual, and yet which I feel is based on a very firm foundation of performance. What I don't want to hear from a conductor is, this is my Beethoven. What I want from a conductor is, I have done everything I can to discover everything I can about Beethoven and his mind and his music. And now I approach it, and perhaps I can bring something of myself to put above that, to make some kind of interpretation. But I want it to be true. And it's not true if I do it from me alone.
No quiero comprometerle, pero ¿nos recomendaría a usted o algún director que le interese especialmente o intérprete para que escuchemos con mayor atención?
Well, in terms of old music, of course, then I would still recommend that people listen to the slightly older generation rather than all the new groups that are appearing as if by magic. You know, Arnoncourt is still somebody who will bring something very special and a real foundation of knowledge to his performances, even if they have become rather more romantic.
Bueno, se nos va terminando el tiempo. Me gustaría tocar una parcela de la que apenas hemos hablado, y es su papel de gestor en varios festivales que antes mencioné. Me gustaría que nos comentara brevemente qué le ha reportado esta faceta suya a la de intérprete y viceversa, qué le ha aportado la faceta de intérprete a la de gestor.
Well, when you say manager, what I really was the artistic director of a number of festivals in London and in Aldborough. I didn't do a lot of managing. I did an awful lot of artistic directing and talking, but the managing was done by the South Bank Centre or the Aldborough Festival. And I really used those opportunities to put together one or two very interesting thematic festivals, and I brought people from abroad who hardly ever, if ever, performed in London. Jordi Savall from Barcelona is coming here to talk, and I brought him to London, I think, 3 times. And really, no one else was bringing him to England. He wasn't coming to England. So because we are in the same field, it was possible for me to call up these people. Hi, Jordi, I want you to come. You know, I'm sorry, we're England. We don't have the same facilities that we have, that you might have in Spain or wherever, but we want you to come. And if you look at the other people who are performing in the festival, I'm sure you'll want to come, because it's quite an exciting lineup. And using those little techniques, I was able to put together some really, really exciting performances from people from all over the world. And that really made me very happy. Of course, I was able to meet them, I was able to listen to them and have some real connection with them, which was very great.
Y me gustaría hacer una última pregunta por si nos da una buena idea a todos para sobrellevar mejor esta crisis que como no podía ser de otra manera está afectando también al mundo de la cultura con recortes presupuestarios. Al mismo tiempo pues apenas se venden discos, no hay muchos jóvenes en las salas de concierto. ¿Qué puede hacer un grupo o qué puede hacer un director un especializado en estos repertorios para integrarse en la sociedad, para vender más discos?
I think the problem with the records is not the problem of the performers, it's the problem of the way the record companies have handled their commercial, their business, and what they've done in the past. And I don't know what the answer is with recordings, except that people who want to make recordings are paying for them themselves and marketing them themselves and using the net in a very big way. So that is one area. As far as funding the arts is concerned, we see every day more and more cuts. But from my standpoint, I also see bloated institutions wasting millions and millions and millions every day throughout the world. Now, you may regard this as a little bit of self-promotion, but my wife and I run our opera performances in concert halls without any other help. We do not have a huge staff wasting resources. And in my experience of working in opera houses, at least half of the funding that they are given is literally flushed down the toilet. I'm sorry to be really quite strong about it. But there are so many areas where money is thrown away by people who are not really careful enough with it. So on the one hand, we have the problem that people waste money. On the other hand, we have the problem of politicians who are not interested in music and do not see the benefits that it can bring, taking the funding away. I do not know where we are going. I know where I am going. And that is, I am going to continue in the way that I've always worked, which is without funding. I, if you like, believe in being an entrepreneur and making things happen, making projects happen, bringing people together and then selling a product as if it were something like a washing machine, if you like. I mean, that's a very, very hard way to look at it. But if you have something that people can relate to and people want and people see and experience, they want it again. And that is the only way that one can maybe survive in the future. That's my answer. But what national institutions will do, I have no idea.
Bueno, tomamos nota y reflexionaremos sobre ello. Muchas gracias a nuestro invitado y hasta mañana. Adiós.